On this episode of ABC Insights, I'm joined by Christine Balling, our Senior Fellow in Latin American Affairs. Christine, welcome. Recently, you had an article in The Hill about the protests in Colombia. I know that you are covering, Peru, Colombia, Central America in general, but maybe we could start off in Colombia.
Yeah, sure. These past couple months have been very tense for Colombian society for a number of reasons. Number one, they obviously share the misery that we've all experienced with regard to COVID and the respective lockdowns. The Colombian economy has been, prior to the protests, has been gravely affected, and primarily the poorest of the Colombians have been the most effective. It sounds somewhat simple, but the campesino farmers, because of the restrictions, have not been able to bring their goods to market, for example. So, and the restrictions themselves in the cities have been very difficult for the average citizen. So that's number one. And then what happened, which was definitely unfortunate timing, is the Duque administration now a couple months ago announced tax reform measures and actually also healthcare reform measures. Now, on one hand, the tax reform, which essentially was raising taxes, it's understandable because the government needs the money, but it was politically tone deaf, in my opinion, because that was the last thing that any Colombian wanted to hear, that he or she was going to suddenly have to pay increased taxes. So that was ostensibly the reason for protests, which started in the cities and then went nationwide. And what happened was, unfortunately, it became much bigger than protesting tax reform. So in the context, there are presidential elections coming up next year in Colombia. And so it is a already very tense, heated political campaign situation. So the political opposition, understandably, this is how politics is everywhere in the world, seized upon the protests and started, in my opinion, fueling the fire.
Sure.
Number one. And then number two, some of the criminal groups in Colombia took advantage of the situation and started sort of up the ante. And what I mean by that is that the protests fairly quickly turned violent. And specifically, when there were incidents of the Colombian police riot division fighting back. And again, it's still unclear as to which reported events were actually the fault of the police, which weren't. They're being investigated. But the point is that because of these isolated incidents, suddenly there was this defund the police, the administration is fascist, the usual stuff. And I guess I'm saying that in somewhat too of a flippant matter, but it really devolved into a situation where it then became sort of a youth movement against oppression. So so the combination of COVID, of the initial protests, which were peaceful and certainly legitimate, and understandable, protesting an ill-timed tax reform bill, devolved into violence. And then finally, while the violence now has actually calmed down, except for the one city of Cali, what remains are these road blockades. So there are various groups, again, initially it was supposedly legitimate, like indigenous groups protesting,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. But the bottom line is what they've been doing is they've been blocking major thoroughfares, which is essentially frozen the supply chain in the company, excuse me, in the country. And in some cases, it's out in the open that they're actually doing this for money. So in other words, the people who are blockading the roads will let certain people through if they pay $100. So, I mean, it's gone.
Do we know who's doing, like, we don't know now? I mean, initially you're saying it's indigenous folks,
Oh,
but
well,
now,
so again, there were legitimate groups
Right.
in theory, but
now, yeah,
it's the dissident, the FARC dissident guerrillas, the ELN, the other armed groups which are interested, generally speaking, in making sure that the government is as destabilized as possible.
sure.
They have the most to benefit, let's put it that way. So and so finally, I'll say right now, the Duque administration is negotiating with a group of people who are representing various other groups. It's not very unified. It's the strike committee. And right now, the Duque administration is insisting that, you know, no sort of negotiation or agreement can be reached until these blockades are lifted. So that's the status right now.
Well, I'll link that as well as your Hill article. So, well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. And I hope to talk with you soon.